You all nice and quiet.
I'm saying 1 minute.
That's better. Okay. Right, good evening, everyone. Before the meeting starts, I've got a couple of announcements to make. Emergency evacuation procedures. In the case of a fire, a bell will ring continuously. If this occurs, please leave the building immediately, following the green fire exit signs out to the assembly point, which is by the War Memorial in Duke Street. If anyone requires assistance, please let me know. Lifts should not be used. Please remain at the assembly point and do not attempt to return to the building until you've been advised that it's safe to do so. Anyone attending this meeting can film it, but I should point out that only councillors, officers, and anyone sitting around these tables may be filmed. Members of the public should not be filmed, so please ensure cameras are pointed only in this direction. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on YouTube. Please would you silence or switch off your mobile phones while the meeting is taking place. Thank you. I'll start with apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillors Dobson, Hughes and Highland.
Right, thank you. Anyone else? No? All here. Thank you. Declarations of interest. All members must disclose any interest they know they have in the items of business on the meeting's agenda, and they must do so now or as soon as they become aware of the interest. We have two. Councillor Pooley.
Thank you, Chair. I believe I've asked this question before. I have a predisposition to be in favour of applications that accelerate the provision of housing. But I've not had to withdraw, I've not had to declare an interest because of that before, but I want people to be aware of that.
Thank you. Just bear with us a minute.
Just to confirm that predisposition is absolutely fine. It's very different to predetermination.
So you're fine, Councillor Pooley. Councillor Wright. Right, thank you. I don't think you have a microphone near you, so I'd appreciate if you'd
I'll just repeat that.
Yes,
on advice from the legal officer, I have got to remove myself from the Southwood and Ferries application. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Next, it's the minutes of the meeting on the 4th of October 2022. Sorry?
10th of January.
Apologies, that's... I picked the wrong one, sorry. It's the committee on the 10th of January. Apologies. Is it your wish I sign these as a true record? Thank you. That's fine. I was reading the wrong bit. Thank you. Right, I intend to read a little more. Bear with me a sec. Right, public question time. If there's anyone here that wishes to look at, to speak now, is there any such person? Then you can speak at the appropriate time with the appropriate application. Now then, I am going to reverse the order of these two applications. So I'm going to take item 7 first. So that is Item 22-00971, FUL, land northeast of Littlefields, Danbury, Chelmsford. Can I have the officer's report, please? I think some of these are not working tonight, so.
Apologies, Chair. Thank you. This is a retrospective application, and the application site there is a 1.1 hectare paddock outlined in red, and the applicant's property is the house there in the top corner outlined in blue. The site abuts the Danbury defined settlement to the west and to the north, and fields surround it. The stables that you can see there in the top northern corner of the red line site, they've been there since approximately the mid-1980s, so a horse field for a very long time. As I said, the application is retrospective, and it's for a water permeable hardcore track that leads from the existing access of Littlefields up to the stables, so vehicles can come in when necessary, deliver hay, horse equipment, etc. And the plan there shows the approximate position of that access track. The aerial photograph to the right-hand side, that just shows the paddock. And I think if you look carefully, you can just about see how vehicles have created some tracks across the field in dry conditions when they've driven across the grass to get to the stables. That is what was constructed at the very beginning. It's a crushed hardcore base with some row planings on top. And when these things go in, they do look quite stark to start with and quite messy and quite an obvious thing. But because it's a permeable surface, it doesn't take too long before weeds start to grow through and it starts to blend a little bit more into the paddock itself. And we've been back this week to have another look a few months later, and you can see that already it's dulled down an awful lot, and come the summer when the weeds have really started to grow through, I think it will be quite an unobtrusive thing within the field itself. So in officer's opinion, this is well screened. The paddock is screened all around from the surrounding area, and we don't believe that the track has a harmful effect on the intrinsic character and beauty of the rural area. It maintains acceptable relationships with all neighbours. There's no increase in traffic. It's still the same traffic visiting the stable, just on the surface. Obviously, there's no highway safety concerns, and our recommendation is for approval, Chairman. Thank you.
Sorry, mine's playing out now. At least that's my excuse. Anyway, in that case, I'll throw it straight open to the committee. Who would like to start? Councillor Poulter.
I don't have a problem with this application at all, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Reading through some of the concerns of the residents, I was wondering if it would be possible to impose a condition about no vehicles left overnight, because I understand the road can't necessarily be seen because it's well screened, but on top of the stable, the road, would vehicles be acceptable? I'd rather they weren't there, left overnight.
I don't think the habit of the use of the field is changing at all. The field has been accessed for many years. Just driving across the grass is my understanding. And whether or not a vehicle is left there, a horse box or something, by the stables, I don't know. But if it has been in the past, it's going to be difficult to say that that's now harmful some 30 years down the line. I think it'd be difficult to argue that a vehicle parked up by the stable would be harmful. It's a well-screened paddock on all sides. You can only really see what's going on once you're in the paddock or from the top bedroom windows of the closest, properties. I think it would be difficult to justify a condition because you have to have reason, it has to be a reasonable request, and I don't think it is.
Okay, anyone else? In that case, I shall suggest that land northeast of Littlefields, Danbury, Chelmsford be accepted. Can I have all those in favour, please?
Second first.
I need a seconder, sorry. Didn't hear, thank you. Sorry, go back to all those in favour. Yep, okay, that's fine, thank you. That's applications carried, thank you. Right, in that case, we'll move straight on to item 6, which is 21-01961 0UT and 21-01961 FUL, the land northwest of Hamberts Farm, Burnham Road, South Woodham Ferrers, Chelmsford. Can we have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so you will have seen in your agenda packs this evening that there are 2 applications for South Woodham Ferrers to be considered. You should also noted the items on the green sheet. The first application is an outline application with all matters reserved except access. The outline application is for up to 1,020 homes. The proposal also includes a care accommodation, a neighbourhood centre, including a community centre, 1,000 square metres of business floor space, land reserved for a primary school and 2 early years, and a site for 5 plots for travelling show people. The proposal also includes landscaping and open space and alterations to the highway infrastructure. The second application is a full application. So this is for the detail of the accesses into the site and the first parts of the road into the site. It also includes the details of the SUDS attenuation basins. So you will have seen in the green sheet about the Secretary of State's holding direction. So before I begin my presentation, I want to draw your attention to that matter. We've received a holding direction from the Secretary of State for the application. What this means is that we can't grant planning permission without the Secretary of State's permission unless the holding direction is lifted. So if the committee resolve to grant permission this evening, then we will forward our recommendation on to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State have been asked by a Member of Parliament to call the application in, and this is the procedure. The fact that they've issued a holding direction, however, is entirely without prejudice to their thoughts on the application. So whether or not they call it in is not relevant to the fact that they've issued a holding direction, so they're without prejudice. It's simply part of the process of considering the MP's request to call the application in. So if I go on to describe the application site, this is shown in red on the screen here. It's a large site. It's mainly agricultural land to the north of South Woodham Ferrers. The site is intersected by the B1418 and runs around the base of Bushy Hill up to the eastern boundary just beyond the Garden of Remembrance. You will have read in your papers that this is an allocated site. The site forms part of Strategic Growth Site 10 in the local plan, and therefore the proposal needs to comply with the policy of the local plan, which is the Strategic Growth Site Policy 10. So in accordance with the local plan requirements, a master plan for this site was approved by Cabinet in March 2021. You will have read within your agenda pack that there are 2 developers for this larger site. The current application has been submitted by Countryside Properties, and the extent of the current application you can see on the screen there is in blue, so that's the countryside land. The area on the screen there in purple is Bellway Homes. the Bellway Homes application will be heard at a planning committee in the near future. So what are we considering this evening? The first point is that the principle of the development is already established by the site allocation, the allocation within the Chelmsford local plan. For the outline application, all matters are reserved except access. So we need to look at compliance with the Strategic Growth Site Policy 10, the access to the site, and whether or not the scheme is able to sufficiently mitigate its own impacts. For the full application, again, we're looking at compliance with the Strategic Growth Site Policy, the details for the first parts of the highway works, and the details of the SUDS attenuation basins. So just to make it really clear, the difference between the two applications, this slide here shows the full application in brown. So you can see the access roundabouts, the first parts of the roads into the site, and the SUDS attenuation basins, which are the circles. So the application includes several parameter plans. So this slide here shows the proposed land uses, which are in line with the approved master plan. So if I first go to the west, you can see there's a rugby ball on the screen, so that is the strategic open space. To the centre of the site, there are play areas. The little people on the red block, that is the community centre and the local centre, and just below that in the light purple is the school. The watering cans in the middle and far over to the east, they represent allotments. Over to the eastern parcel, you can see there's a purple area, so that is the travelling show person site and the 1,000 square metres of business floor space. So this is one of the other parameter plans, which is height. So you can see here that the higher land is up to 2 stories and on the edges of the site. Moving into the site, the heights of the building are up to 2.5 stories, and to the core of the site, so near the Sainsbury's, the local centre, are up to 3 stories. So this is another parameter plan. So this is the access and movement parameter plan, which shows the network of cycle and pedestrian routes through the site. The purple is shared pedestrian and cycle routes. The blue is pedestrian routes, and the yellow is the proposed new bridleway. You can see on the screen there, there's also a green line, which is the existing bridleway, which is to be retained. I'll go on now to show you how the site is proposed to be accessed. So if we start over to the west of the site here, the proposal here is to construct a new roundabout on the B1418 to allow access into the site either side of the road. And you can see on the plan on the right here, in the purple circles, these are where there would be toucan crossings across the road. The proposal also shows, if you can see the yellow and the blue lines either side of the road, these are pedestrian and cycle routes all the way down either side of the B1418. So if we then move slightly west to focus on the entrance to Sainsbury's, so here you can see that the proposal, again in the purple circles, is to upgrade the existing zebra crossing to a parallel crossing, which allows both cyclists and pedestrians to cross. There'd also be a new shared cycleway and footway along the front of the medical centre, an upgrade to the existing crossing to a toucan crossing, which again is signalised and allows for both pedestrians and cyclists. And from this point onwards, the south side of the Burnham Road would also be increased, the pavement there would be increased to 2 metres in width. So if we then move further west, so this is just past Hamberts Farm. The proposal here is for a new roundabout into the site. On the north side of the road from this point, there would also be a segregated 3-metre cycleway and 2-metre footway, which you can see there in the blue and the yellow on the right-hand side of the screen. Finally, then, we move to the very east of the site. And over here, you have, at the top of the screen, that's an existing bridleway crossing, which would become a toucan crossing. There's also a new left-in and left-out junction in Thank you. Okay, so if we move on to highway matters, one of the main concerns of local residents is the impact of the proposal on the existing highway network. In the next couple of slides, I'll set out how the developer is proposing to
Thank you. Now, I know we have several people to speak, so can we start with Mr. Kevin Coleman, please? And you have 2 minutes. It's not on, I don't think. Okay. Bear with us a minute.
Thank you. Thank you. Is that better?
That's much better, thank
Lovely.
you.
Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to make this short statement tonight. As the committee will be aware from the very thorough report prepared by your officers, the application before you tonight is one that's allocated in your local plan and is also one that was the subject of an approved master plan by Cabinet in March 2021. The principle of development, as you've heard, is therefore very well established. The committee might also have noticed that the application was validated in October 2021, so it's been under scrutiny now for some 15 months before being reported to you tonight. The reason for the lengthy processing time is not because we've made substantial changes to the scheme during that period. It's because of the diligence of your officers and those of the Highway Authority in analysing the scheme, reviewing the information that we've submitted, analysing it, challenging it, requiring technical amendments where appropriate. In consultation with officers, the proposed highway mitigation measures in particular have been refined, and it is this process that's led to the Highway Authority being able to reach its conclusions that the proposal is acceptable. On all other matters, your planning officers are satisfied that the development will deliver on the requirements of your local plan and will be in accordance with the objectives of the approved master plan. All other consultees, including the Education Authority, the Lead Local Flood Authority, the Health Authority, are all satisfied with the application and that with the mitigation measures proposed, the development is acceptable. So for all these reasons, we hope the Planning Committee will be able to support its officers' recommendation of approval tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we have Mr. Alan Brunning, please? You have 2 minutes, of course.
All right. Chelmsford local plan states it will meet the local development needs up to 2036. The proposal here, the traffic proposal, is for infrastructure only to 2026 and must be rejected on that alone. An independent traffic report from SCP consultants highlighted significant errors in the submitted VISIM model and travel plans, concluding key MPPF requirements would not be met. Essex Highways, however, claim the complex VISIM model had been checked and validated by their own consultants. However, there are serious errors in the model, and I give you 3 examples. Junction 4, that's the KFC roundabout, Ferrers Road northbound traffic volume. VISIM output is 583 vehicles by 2026. Measured data was 705 in 2018, 644 in 2020 with lockdown. Junction 1, Hamberts Road roundabout, westbound traffic volume from the Dengie. VISIM output was 553, measured was 887 in 2017. Any conclusion based on traffic volumes lower than measured over 4 years ago must be invalid. Junction 2, Sainsbury's roundabout, design remains the same. The model concluded that by 2026, the development will increase the morning westbound traffic from 843 to 1,002 vehicles per hour, whilst reducing the vehicle queue delays from 55 to 28 seconds. And it will reduce the queue lengths from 1.2 kilometres to 400 metres. Clearly, this is not possible and the model must be considered invalid. You should reject this application on the basis that the traffic assessment is not credible and therefore not safe. and does not meet the requirements of MPPF 110, 111 and 112, as it will significantly have an adverse effect on the queuing.
Thank you. Can we have Mr. Cormack, please?
Evening. During the process leading up to the committee meeting, important measures have been put off again and again, and now the planning meeting is upon us and we still don't have answers. The two excellent independent SCP reports from the independent consultant have been dismissed without any explanation. Here's a couple of examples of ongoing problems. With respect to the VISIM model, our understanding is that Jacobs only checked the base model and not the model with the junction mitigations in place. The big problem was the way it modelled the mitigation measures. The key issue was the way Jacobs modelled the pedestrian crossing, as it markedly underestimated the number of people crossing, and as a result, it will show a much more positive picture than would actually occur on site. Essex County Council and Chelmsford County Council should confirm that this has been rectified, and if so, what are the revised results, and why haven't we been told them? Another key issue which affects the modelling is the design year of 2026. SCP is saying that this is not realistic based on the scale of the development. The building work will scarcely have been started, let alone finished by this date. Has Essex County Council ever explained why it feels this is acceptable? This is especially pertinent after a recent inquiry result in which a development was not deemed to have modelled a realistic base traffic flow, and I've sent in the link to the findings of that inquiry. Additionally, a reduced traffic flow was used in one of the modelling scenarios, which was supposed to reflect the sustainable travel measures that would be implemented, but these measures were not deemed comparable with a town the size of Southwood and Ferrers. Again, no explanation has been given as to why ECC thinks this is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Southwood and Ferrers Town Council. I'm not sure which of you is going to be speaking, or is it both? Because you have 5 minutes.
Right, yeah. Councillors, as you would have read from our written submission on the planning applications, Southwood and Ferrers Town Council does not support this application. Our reasoning is the impact on existing residents of Southwoodham through congestion and road safety, the absence of a thorough assessment by the Highway Authority, as well as drainage and sewage concerns. In our town's neighbourhood plan, our residents accepted the need for extra housing and that Southwood and Ferrers must take its burden of new development in Chelmsford district. That's not in dispute. We accept that the applicant has made some progress in alleviating concerns since the master plan submission, but we feel it's too little and too late. We have concerns about extra traffic travelling clockwise, in particular around the town, along Ferrers Road, as it seeks to avoid the congestion and junctions created by the development. Despite the developer's traffic modelling, seems to suggest a miraculous fall in traffic after the development. It is anticipated that the monitoring surveys will be undertaken until the development is complete, and a further year after. The question is whether this will be sufficient to prevent the existing Southwood and Ferrers residents from being significantly inconvenienced by the new development. Southwood and Ferrers Town Council remains concerned the ultimate capacity constraints of the A132 leading up to the Rettendon Turnpike and its apparent conflict with the Chelmsford local plan of May 2020, which states, capacity improvements, including necessary junction improvements, must be brought forward as early as possible in tandem with the delivery of development to mitigate its impact. So where are those improvements? City councillors should weigh out what does early as possible mean, and given this was cited in Chelmsford Council's recent submission to the Morden District Council outline planning for the Hawthorne development as a reason for objection, why doesn't it apply to this development? With regard to mitigating measures and improvements, the applicant proposed to the main Shore Farm roundabout. The Town Council has concerns that the developer does not consider the increase in delay caused by the additional vehicles from the development of 44 seconds up to 72 seconds to be significant and over capacity. That's nearly a doubling. and that these will be addressed with the proposed road engineering and alternative travel options. Cyclists and pedestrians going from the new development to our existing town are still not well serviced either with their shared cycle pavement, especially along Holbridge Road, which is the main route from the proposed development to the rail station, and it only measures 2 metres across instead of the 3 metres suggested in LTN 120. The offer of increased bus provision is appreciated to help alleviate the inevitable rise in road vehicles due to the expansion, but like Essex County Council say in their report, our councillors have concerns about the length of commitment to supporting these services from the developer, especially given that a car can make the journey in less than half the time the bus takes. And on rail, with the apparent reducing and downgrading of train capacity on the Southminster to Southwood and Wickford rail branch line by the Department for Transport and Greater Anglia, many commuters and leisure travellers to London tend to favour car travel to the better serviced Wickford station, and this doesn't appear to have been taken into account by the applicant in their traffic modelling. With the projected developments here and along the railway corridor to the east of our town, seemingly promoting and relying on rail services, we believe the developers, Essex and district councils should be lobbying for improvements to rail services, otherwise Southwood and Ferrers will suffer on traffic. The disposal of sewage from the new development is an ongoing concern despite a new pumping station proposed for the existing properties, and city councillors are asked to seek assurances from Anglian Water that the sewage from this does not impact on extra outfall and pollution into Fen Creek and the River Crouch. Likewise with surface water drainage from the east of the site via the existing ditch that runs by the side of the Garden of Remembrance and by our town park, there is no indication of where the water would drain to or how it would find its way to the River Crouch eventually. And finally, on this particularly important point, Southwood and Ferrers Town Council feel let down that our submission had to be made before citing Essex County Council's transport assessment, and that the consultation period wasn't extended to allow sufficient time to assess it, with just 1 week separating its sending to our clerk, and it still hasn't been published on your website, and the meeting here tonight. It cannot be fair to our residents to have to assess applications blind to standard expert advice, and we ask the committee if a decision to approve is made tonight, it'll be a rushed one, which may open the City Council to legal challenge in our view. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We move on to Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. You've heard this evening of concerns about wastewater, drainage and road infrastructure. I'd like to raise some other issues which I believe the committee needs to satisfy itself on, and which should be raised as conditions on any acceptance of the application, either tonight or in future if the decision is not taken. Firstly, Southwood and Ferrers Neighbourhood Plan, agreed by the people of Southwood and Ferrers through a referendum and adopted by this council, states on page 42, section 6, development proposals will be supported which, A, in the northern growth area include accessible green space that complements and completes the network of multifunctional green infrastructure around the town. Given the recent publication of the options document for the local plan revision, our provisions in the town's neighbourhood plan are under serious threat in this respect, and I ask the committee to make it a condition of passing this application that the area north of the development be handed over to either Chelmsford City Council or Southwood and Ferrers Town Council in order that a community land trust be formed to safeguard our precious open space. The developer Countryside has an option on this land and the transfer could be negotiated. If this is not done, the door remains open to fill this vital green space with houses and our green necklace will be broken. A footpath between two housing estates does not, in my opinion, count as green infrastructure. I would also remind members that one argument used by the administration for not putting a new bypass in was to protect the environment. Recognise we should recognise that the countryside is important for our well-being and our health. Second point is that the application should not be progressed until Essex County Council, one of the landowners, formally commits to providing a primary school on the land allocated in the master plan. It is scandalous that this council's members and officers were led to believe that the Conservative Essex County Council Cabinet had finally agreed to this provision prior to the county elections 2 years ago, only to see this decision reversed once the Tories were returned to power. We know that the developers are keen for the school to be built. The residents of our town want the school to be built. Our schools cannot support the number of children likely to be living in the 1,200 new dwellings that are proposed. 1,000 from the countryside and the rest from Bellway when that comes through. Collingwood, the only school with some capacity, is on the other side of the town and would need parents to drive their children there and back. This is unacceptable given Essex County Council's supposed championing of reduced car use. Schools are also well-known factors in building community, and the importance of this should not be underestimated. This provision should be a condition of work commencing on site and needs to be properly phased so that our existing schools are at no point overwhelmed with new children. My final point is this: the whole site should be off the gas grid, and all properties built to a low zero bill standards, and I feel that should be a condition of work commencing on the buildings. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Good evening, all. Thank you, Chair. I feel as though I've been on this horse for somewhere around 20 years, because I go back to the plan done by the current administration when it was in power last time, when they put a bypass on the development of 1,500 houses on this site. Strange that it's not there this time. It's also strange that Essex County Council are in a hurry to get it built because they bought the land at cheap rates in the 1970s, and now they're trying to dump it, take the money and go somewhere else. They could equally spend it in Southwood and Ferrers, in my view. That's not the bit I've written, that's the bit I've just made up. I've been involved with that. I spoke on this plan several times. Local inquiry, the plan inquiry in 2018, the policy board, and I raised the same questions that's been raised by members of the public and my colleagues about highways issues. And I was told at the policy board in January 21 that they'll all be sorted out at the planning stage. That was said by the leader of the opposition, Councillor Whitehead at the time, to me. So I dropped it. Perhaps I shouldn't have dropped it at the time, and we wouldn't have had a master plan. But there you go. We are today on the bay when it's all going to be sorted out, I believe. I'm just going to talk about nothing technical like these people. In the last 5 years, Malden District has added several developments along the Crouch Valley near the railway and, of course, the highway that leads straight to Southwood and Ferrers. The developments, though relatively small, have no additional infrastructure on mitigation of traffic. The nearest place to us, North Fanbridge, has got 200 houses being built, no facilities whatsoever, advertised as nearest accommodation, doctors' shops, is in Southwood and Ferrers. They're going to be driving those cars to Southwood and Ferrers to go shopping and to the doctors. And if you want to ask the doctors, they'll tell you they're getting patients from those areas already. So I think there's another consideration. The nearest large supermarket, as I said, is in Southwood and Ferrers. The Southminster branch line itself is a poor service. It's pretty rubbish now. It used to be better when it was a push-pull train, but it's rubbish now. And I'm very surprised that the three councils, Essex County Council, this council and Malden District Council, didn't get together, knowing the amount of development that was going along in that river valley and that railway valley, where the railway track is, to try and get the railway to run, because it's far more sustainable to have that railway running properly than it is to run a fleet of buses to Chelmsford, which is going to take 45 minutes per bus to get there. And when you take the full size of the development and the people who already live in South Woodham, it's an awful lot of buses to get to Chelmsford Station. And the same with Wickford Station is 20 minutes away in a bus in the morning. I drove it only, well, I didn't drive it, my wife drove me the other day through Wickford, and it took us 20 minutes in a car. It's going to take longer in a bus, so it's not a good option. Buses is not sustainable, and nor is cycling to Chelmsford, by the way. So I think there needs to be a rethink on traffic and encouragement to the railway to improve its service. We did it with Bewley Park. We've got a railway station coming. It may have taken 25 years. That's as long ago as I remember it being applied for, because I was here at the time. And we've got the station, and I think there's not such a big problem on the branch line. It needs another passing loop, several £1 million possibly. But unless Network Rail is told by somebody they've got to get on and do it, it won't ever happen, ever. Even if Bradwell comes along in the future, they were saying we can't do it because they need someone to tell them to do it, i.e. the government. And hopefully, as it seems the Planning Inspectorate called it in, maybe they'll tell them. I don't know. We'll see. Recently, a planning application, as an example, was made to Malden District Council for 750 dwellings at Hawthorne, right next to the station, so they can use the railway and the road. Right? And I won't give you the number. This council's officers responded to that, and I'm not going to quote the whole thing. They commented at some length, a page and a half I've got here on the website. One of the significant points in it, it's quite clear, it says, traffic modelling supporting Chelmsford local plan identified significant constraints that even when mitigated, left room for further growth. 750 houses 6 miles away, that is further growth. And it goes on to say, development from the proposed growth of Malden on the City Council's area, particularly in relation to the A130 and the A132 junction at Redden Turnpike. These are forecast to be over capacity by 2036. That's on the traffic modelling done by Essex County Council and the consultant and etc. They're not taking into account the whole picture. The picture is they're building houses along that road. There's already 1,000 being built now. Burnham, Hawthorne, all along the villages along the railway line. All very commendable to use the railway, but the railway don't work. The road doesn't work either. So I think there needs to be a proper traffic assessment, taking into account the future commitments by Malden District Council, who, if we mitigate the way this is being proposed, when Malden build those houses, they're nowhere for them to go. Are we going to put a toll gate there and say if you want to come through, it's £1 a time, payable to the town council? Because that is where we are. They'll stop when they get to the border, because at the end of the day, it'll be blocked up. So I think basically it needs to be refused tonight with asking officers to go back, look at the traffic situation and talk to Malden District Council, particularly about their proposals for a new site next to South Woodham Ferrers with 1,000 houses on it, which is in their call for sites. So we really need to get this act together and not just look at it as Chelmsford District. There's no border there. Let's look at the whole of the Dengie. I urge the committee to refuse this as it stands and ask officers to produce an up-to-date traffic data taking into account development that has already taken place and know that is going to take place in the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before I open it to the committee, I'd like to go back to officers to take up any points they think they can explain before we get to them.
Thank you, Chair. I'll respond first to the Town Council, South Woodham Ferrers Town Council. So the concerns were raised about extra traffic travelling clockwise around Ferrers Road to avoid congestion. The development is mitigating its own impacts with both sustainable transport measures and junction improvements. So the transport assessment included modelling, which shows that it would not be quicker to travel around Ferrers Road. There are concerns that there were not further pedestrian crossings proposed across Burnham Road and Ferrers Road. In answer to that, the Burnham Road crossings have been provided at points where there are connections on either side of the road, and where people are most likely to cross across the Burnham Road. Ferrers Road does not require additional crossings or safety features as a result of this development. So this development must mitigate its own impacts. A query was raised about whether or not the monitoring surveys are enough. Monitoring surveys of traffic will be carried out annually and also a further year after the completion of the development to see if what is actually happening on the ground is what the modelling showed. If there are higher trip rates than predicted, then money has been secured in a bond, or will be secured in a bond as part of the Section 106 agreement, which can be used to provide further mitigation. A question was raised about the capacity constraints on the A132 towards Rettendon. Capacity improvements largely occur at junctions. The A132 is proposed to have an increased merger lengths provided, and also mitigation is proposed at the Shore Farm roundabout, Hawkhill and Rettendon Turnpike. The mitigation triggers for these works are actually quite early on in the development. So for the B14 roundabout enlargement, that's after 100 occupations. The Shore Farm is 300 occupations, and Rettendon Turnpike and Hawkhill is 405 occupations, and these are all secured in the conditions in your agenda pack. The next question was that the developer doesn't consider the increase in delay caused by additional vehicles to be significant or overcapacity. In answer to that, the morning peak, there would be a reduction in vehicle delay. This is what the modelling shows. In the PM peak, the results show that there will be an increase in vehicle delay of less than a minute for eastbound journeys and just over a minute for westbound journeys. So remember, the test of the MPPS is severe, and we don't consider that that is a severe impact. Next query was to do with cyclists and saying that they're not well served from the development to the existing town. We think they are, and we've worked hard to get plenty of cycle connections to the town, which includes a new route along the old railway line. There are also a variety of routes available from the development via existing routes through the town, so for example via Old Wickford Road or off carriageway route from King Edward's Road. And the County Council Highways Authority are content with the proposed widths of the cycle routes. Concerns are raised regarding the length of commitment to supporting the new bus services. The development is required to provide an improved service prior to the occupation of the development. So that has to be put in before houses are occupied, and 1 year following the final occupation, by which time the service should be self-funding. Commuters and leisure travellers to London, the Town Council raised the point that they tend to travel to Wickford Station. And was this modelled? Yes, it was modelled because it used the background data. And also to point out that a new bus service is proposed to be put in place to Wickford train station. A query was raised about the disposal of sewage being an ongoing concern. Anglian Water need to make sure that there is sufficient capacity in the network, and this will be funded by the developer. The developer, as I said in my presentation, has already agreed a strategy with Anglian Water, and the details of the strategy are reserved by condition. The overflow situation into Fen Creek that was mentioned is potentially an existing problem, but that's not the responsibility of this developer to rectify an existing problem. And if there is an issue, then that needs to be taken up with Anglian Water directly, because they are the responsible body. A query was also raised about the drainage ditch along the side of the Garden of Remembrance, and you'll see in your agenda packs that condition 25 requires a schedule of repair works to be carried out to this ditch. So this would include a repair of a blocked pipe there. And also just to remember that the sustainable drainage scheme, the proposal there is to make sure that there's no greater runoff of water from this site than the existing situation. Finally, in terms of the response from the Highways Authority, as you know, the Highways Authority have been considering this application for a very long time. So for the past 2.5 years, they've been looking at this application and the transport assessment, both during the development of the master plan, at pre-application stage, and during the life of the application. They've requested extensive information from the developer, which resulted in an amended transport assessment, which was submitted in October last year. The Highways Authority are now satisfied that the proposal is acceptable, and our view is that members have all of the information available to properly consider this application. If I now move on to Councillor Bentley and Councillor Roberts, the other two neighbour representations are purely highway matters, so my colleague Mrs Featherstone will answer those two neighbour representations.
Right.
Councillor Bentley mentioned about the land to the north of the site being given over as community land. Maybe negotiations may be carried out, but this is not a planning consideration. So it's not a consideration. We have to be only looking at things that we can require under planning, what is necessary, what is reasonable. So we can't require a developer to sell land to another developer. That is not a planning matter. The need to formally commit to a primary school is the second point raised by Councillor Bentley. The application does include land to be reserved for a primary school, and it would be down to Essex County Council to decide whether or not that primary school is required. And we do have Blaise Gammy here from the County Council if you wish him to comment any further on that. The comments from Councillor Roberts. So the Northern Bypass that was mentioned, this was discussed at length during the local plan examination, and you'll see within your agenda packs, within the officer's report, that the inspector who considered the local plan did consider whether or not there was a need for a northern bypass, and her view was that there was not a need for a northern bypass and that junction improvements would be sufficient to mitigate the impact of this development, which is what you have before you this evening. A query was also raised about people driving to Southwood and Ferrers from Malden, from North Fambridge and other villages to the east, and the developments that are taking place in Malden. So again, just to state that the transport assessment does include modelling, which does include the background data from Malden. So all of the allocated sites in the Malden local plan are included within that transport assessment and modelling. The railway service, it is acknowledged that the Southwood and Ferrers train station is a branch line only, and that people tend to travel to Wickford, which is why we've secured a peak bus service to Wickford every 30 minutes in the peak service, in the peak period rather. In terms of the Hawthorne development, that has been submitted by a developer outside, it's not an allocated site in the Malden local plan, so that has not been included in the modelling for this. But the point here is that the Hawthorne development would need to take into account the Southwood and Ferrers application and not the other way around, because the Southwood and Ferrers application is an allocated site in the local plan. There's no decision on the Hawthorne development. We don't know if Malden are going to approve it or refuse it. My understanding is that the application at Hawthorne has had an extension of time on it until May, so we won't know the outcome of that until then. I think that answers all of the queries raised for those few comments, but I will then pass over to my colleague, Mrs Featherstone, for the other comments.
Yes,
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Not working. Have we got one that works? This is getting pretty desperate.
Good evening. Is it actually
Yes,
working?
it's working.
Yeah. Okay. If I can provide an explanation to the more technical points raised by the earlier speakers, the Highway Authority has been in discussion with the developer and its highway consultant regarding the transportation aspects of the development proposal since the local plan preferred option stage, including pre-application discussions and continued discussions during the consultation period for the planning application, where we have analysed and challenged the submitted information. As a result, the developer has submitted numerous additional transport notes and a vision model, culminating in submission of a revised transport assessment in October 22, encompassing all the changes. The Highway Authority is now satisfied that the development proposal is acceptable in highway and transportation terms, subject to a comprehensive package of mitigation measures for capacity enhancements and sustainable transport measures to be secured by condition or legal obligation. Therefore, the application is not considered contrary to MPPF and the Highway Authority cannot support a refusal. Reference has been made to a recent appeal decision, and I would reiterate the inspector's words from that decision. It should be noted that the process of assessing the highway impact is not formulaic and requires a number of assumptions and professional judgments to be applied. There will be scope for disagreement between professionals, and it will often be the case that two different assumptions can both be reasonably made, where justified in the particular circumstances of the case. However, it is for this reason that those undertaking transport assessments generally apply a precautionary approach, making conservative assumptions that demonstrate the outcome is robust. We have required the developer to undertake a robust assessment using ECC trip rates, which we have put forward, which were more onerous than the rates they wanted to use initially. So turning to the modelling and the future assessment year, it is important to remember the Highway Authority can only require the development to mitigate their own impact. They are not required to provide betterment to existing issues. The full development has been assessed in future year 2026. This means that modelling in 2026 includes the total development traffic and allows us to determine appropriate mitigation the developer is required to provide. Assessing a future year of 2036 would involve adding forecast growth to the base flows before adding the development traffic, which in effect would reduce the proportional impact of the development traffic and potentially reduce the amount of development mitigation that could be secured. Therefore, ECC is satisfied that a robust case has been assessed at 2026 and that it is appropriate to identify the required mitigation package for the development's impact. Looking at traffic data, the primary data used in the assessments is pre-COVID data from February 2020. For the A130 and the 132 intersection, 2016 data has been referred to and checked against later surveys. All data has background growth added to it to bring it in line with current dates. The growth applied to the data is actually higher than the recently released government growth forecasts, making the assessment robust. The COVID pandemic has meant that more recent traffic counts would not provide an accurate representation of traffic flows. Traffic counts across the county, including on the A132, do show that traffic levels have not quite returned to pre-COVID figures, so the data used in the assessments is robust. Modelling. The queue lengths have been modelled acceptably. Standard junction modelling only considers individual junctions and not adjacent ones. Sometimes the exit of a junction is affected by a queue related to a neighbouring junction, but this cannot be modelled as it is an exit. Queues are measured by taking an hourly average of the maximum queue at regular intervals. So when you average it out over the hour, it does not actually show the maximum queue. It is accepted that there are maximum queue lengths within the peak hour, but these aren't shown. And this is an industry standard way of assessing, of undertaking the modelling. The Highway Authority had concerns that the queuing was not replicated correctly in the original modelling, hence the VISM model was undertaken of the whole corridor, which does show the interaction of each junction. So turning to the VISM model, concerns have been made as to the accuracy of the VISM modelling. VISM modelling is very specialised and requires expert technical input and assessment. The VISM model, base and proposed mitigation, has been assessed by Jacobs. Some amendments were requested, and now the inputs are deemed to have been acceptably modelled, and the outcome is acceptable. Jacobs' feedback of the future model results was used to inform the final refinement for the proposed mitigation. A VISM model is a corridor model used to show the interaction between junctions, which is not possible in standalone junction modelling. It is a good visualisation tool. It was used to look at what further mitigation would be required that was not identified in the individual junction modelling. The Essex County Council's highway response to Chelmsford planning is based upon the SC1 assessment of the VISM model. There were two assessments undertaken. At the SC1 assessment, using more robust, i.e. higher traffic figures. The SC2 assessment undertaken by the applicant's transport consultants is what the consultant's view is the likely impact using vehicle trip rates, which are consistent with the local plan evidence-based and a more localised distribution of traffic, which may occur with strong or successful travel plan measures. The highways mitigation package is based on the SC1 assessments with the higher traffic figures. It should be noted that the ECC trip rates are robust, higher than those used in the local plan modelling, and gives minimal weight to the sustainable modal share. The developer will provide significant sustainable travel infrastructure and incentives as part of the development, and therefore the ECC trip rates are considered to be the worst case scenario. Vision modelling does not use direct traffic flow inputs, so the flows have to be calibrated because it's a corridor model. Therefore, they cannot be directly compared to the traffic count data. The inputs have to go through a flow validation process, which is why it appears there's different traffic flow figures, but it's because they've had to be calibrated. Regarding Malden allocation sites, the traffic related to the housing allocations within Malden District has been included in the South Walden Fellas allocation modelling within the tempo growth rate supplied. Since the South Walden Ferries TA has been submitted, the latest tempo rates have been released by the Department for Transport, and these are actually lower than the ones used to assess the TA. Therefore, the data in the TA relating to background growth is robust. I think it's already been mentioned, but the September 22 planning application in Hawthorne has also been referenced, which was submitted after the South Walden Ferries scheme and is not an allocated site. Therefore, any assessment for that scheme would require local plan allocations to be considered. There is no requirement in the MPPF to consider speculative developments. I think that covers all the sort of more technical points raised.
If anything else comes up, please.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I'll open it to the.
Questions, or one of my points wasn't answered by officers.
This, but
I'm just asking for somebody to reply to do with the gas grid point.
I'm sure we'll get information. Yeah, thank you. To the committee. I'm sure there will be quite a few questions still coming up that will fit with what you have to talk about. Thank you, Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Chair. I have some concerns about this, but I should state at the outset that in principle I'm in favour of this development. But I have first of all some education questions. Like Councillor Bentley, I want to know whether the County Council Education Department is going to build a school on this site. There are various implications that depend upon your answer.
Right. Is there any other education question at the moment? And then I'll take them together.
I've got quite a few more to follow, but it depends on this answer.
Okay. All right. Mr. Gammy, I think you can take over at this point.
Happy to take that. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Before a decision could be taken to actually go ahead with building a new school or not, there's three steps that need to be completed. First of all, you need to actually ascertain that there is actually a need, that the pupils that we expect to come through from our forecasts are actually arriving. It would be damaging to the existing schools within South Walden Ferris if we were to open a brand new school within the town without making sure that there is actually sufficient demand to fill those additional school places. And obviously we need to take that very, very seriously. It would be quite reckless, after all, to open a brand new school only to have to close one down the road because the demand isn't there. That wouldn't be a good use of public finances. The second step is the statutory process, which includes public consultation, and I certainly would not want to prejudice that public consultation by implying that any particular decision has or will be made. And thirdly, it isn't actually Essex County Council's decision to open a new school. That decision lies with the Secretary of State. All new schools, after all, now are academies, except in exceptional circumstances where no academy provider comes forward actually wanting to sponsor a new school.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I'm going to quickly ask whether you have a specific date at which you then look at that data.
Actually, looking at this is a sort of ongoing process. We, on a yearly basis, publish a 10-year plan, and as part of that annual cycle, we would review the needs of South Woodham, along with all of the areas up and down the county. And as soon as we actually began to see an emerging need for additional provision, be it expansions to existing schools or a new school, we would then obviously bring forward a business case for that to our members.
Thank you, that might be helpful. Councillor Potter.
I conclude from that no decision has yet been made and probably won't be made for at least 1, 2, possibly more years. So the question is, if eventually you don't decide, or the Secretary of State doesn't decide to take up the school there, what happens to the land? I ask this in particular because I'm aware of a previous occasion when it hasn't been taken up for a school, the land's reverted to the developer who's built on it. If he builds on it on a 2-acre site, that will be a 2-hectare site, and at 30 to the acre, that's about another 150 buildings. Now, if you have another 150 buildings, that increases the number of school places that you'll need to find, and it also increases the traffic that goes through the town. So I need to know the answer to that. What happens to the land? And if it is going to go back to the developer and he built on it, has the additional traffic been modelled?
I'll take the first part of that question, if I may. I mean, I think it's a very pertinent point that Councillor Poulter has asked. It wouldn't actually be a matter for Essex County Council's Education Authority, because obviously if a school isn't built, then the land option that we'd secure through the Section 106 wouldn't be exercised. Therefore, the land would never have passed into Essex County Council ownership. I think probably the question, perhaps is one that would then rest with yourselves, the City Council, and it is something that you may wish to control through your own clauses within a Section 106. Especially, I would just add that if the assumption has been made within the viability assessment for the development that a school will be built and that land will pass to us, obviously the value of that in that viability assessment, you may then want to, in effect, capture for an alternative use.
Thank you, Chair. So my question now to officers is, if the land is not taken up by the option that we've heard about and reverts to the builder, what happens to it?
So, as Blaise Gammy has said, it would be a matter for the Section 106 negotiations. So we don't know at this stage what the land would be used for. But your comment that it could be used for housing, if it were to be used for housing, that would be a separate planning application, which we would have to consider and then look at the highway implications of that separate application for the school site.
Okay.
Chair, it seems
One more?
One more,
or more?
Yeah. Can we draw the Section 106 application or agreement in such a way that we as a council determine what happens to that land? Because I anticipate that if a planning application came in to develop land which is already surrounded by buildings, it would be hard to resist that unless we can find an alternative use. So if the probability is that it's going to be, if it's not taken up, the probability is that it's going to be used for housing, then we need to address that issue now on highway grounds and also on educational places grounds. To leave it later is too late, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Bear with us a minute. Okay.
So we would usually reserve the land for 10 to 15 years. After that period, we then don't require that land for a school, so we couldn't. From what Mr. Green's saying is that we couldn't then require it to be for something else. I may defer to our legal advisor on this.
Yeah, I agree. I think there may be problems with trying to do that on a longer period. I think it's something we would need to look at. But I would say if there was going to be a further development, that it would be a separate application, and I think you would deal with it at that point. I don't think we could have a look at what we could do on the Section 106, but I can't say at this point that you could just bind what could happen to that further down the line. I think that would be an issue.
Sorry, I haven't got a microphone, but I think the point here is that for us to specify through a 106 or through a planning application, or a planning condition, a need for the land, we need to know what it is now. It needs a planning purpose. At this point, we haven't got that. What we're saying at the moment is that we believe there is a significant case for a new school based on figures coming forward. I think the critical period for us to agree the right period for that, you heard from Braze that he's not going to do this assessment until at least 5 years, probably. So I think a 10 to 15 year period where we've got a clause on that site is the appropriate way forward. I can't tell you that if Countryside didn't take that land forward in 15 years' time, what is a need for that piece of land? We've got to be assessed at that point in time. We can't second guess it at this point in time. There's not a need for another piece of land because we're looking at for a school at this point in time. So we're preserving it for a period of time. But if it did come forward like it did on Berganza Way many years ago, I'm sure that's what you're referring to, we will consider that at the appropriate time when it comes forward as a planning application.
Can we draw up Section 106 agreement in such a way that the County Council has the option to, they can continue to exercise the option up to 10 to 15 years, or say 10 years, so that there's no question of it being built on or reverting to the developer for that time. And not only that, but also the early years facilities of 0.13 hectare, which is about a quarter of an acre, I think. So put the two together. If we have an option, or sort of restrict that option so that we have control over what happens to that land through the 106 agreement for a period of 10 years. Because, as you say, circumstances will have changed by then, and with the greatest respect, I anticipate that neither you nor I will be here.
I agree with you there. My preference, I said this before, I think we should be looking at a longer period than 10 years, because it will take a bit of time before development to get built out, before the rates have changed and the population characters of South Woodham have changed. So I think, to protect us for your concern about a need for a school, maybe we should look towards 15 rather than 10. If there's not a case for the school by 10 or 10 year period, then we can't take it up, because the purpose of putting that 106 requirement there is for educational purposes. If there's not a case for educational purposes, then I don't think I've got a case to take up the land. So if you ask me, can we take the land up and build houses ourselves, or build another purpose on that, the answer is no.
No, I don't expect you even in retirement to do that. But what I'm trying to provide for is that if the land reverts to the developer, which is a possibility, I've no idea what it would amount to in percentage terms, that if it is developed for housing, that we address the potential knock-on effects of that now, even if we address it by putting a period of time in a Section 106 agreement, because, as you say, come the end of that period, circumstances will have changed, and another committee could make the appropriate decision at that time.
It's our intention to put a time period on that. I don't think Sally has agreed that time period with Countryside. All Section 106 is not voluntary, but it's negotiation. So there's a negotiation to be had, but, you know, I'm conscious that I want to hear your views on what you think is appropriate length of time for that reserve and the site.
Looks like back to you, Councillor. Councillor Porter.
Yeah,
And then we'll move on.
Lorraine wants to say something.
There's just something I wanted to add. I think we need to be a bit careful, not trying to prejudge something that may happen in the future. We may be going a little bit too far with that, because if there was an application needed in the future, it's almost like we're getting into the territory of trying to prejudge that. You know, and as we say, the circumstances could be quite different. I think it's probably, I probably disagree with you, Councillor Porter, that I think the decision would need to be taken later as to what should happen with that land. I think it's getting into dangerous territory.
No, I'm not suggesting we sort of say what should happen to the land. What I am saying is that no decision will be made on that for 10 to 15 years, 10 years, 15 years, whichever, so that the committee at that time, because we can't prejudge what they're going to do. This committee can't tie down a future committee, because each planning application has to be judged on its facts at the time. And but I just don't want it built on without us having the option to determine what happens on the knock-on effect.
I think we need to go back to Mr. Gammy to finish on this point, and then we'll find out what else. Well, can you just...
Just very quickly,
you can
thank
come in a minute.
I was just on the option period. In Essex County Council's Developers Guide to Developer Contributions, in the Appendix A, I believe, there is a model legal agreement. The option period clause in there recommends a 10-year period which starts on completion of development. So it's certainly within the sort of timeframes that Mr. Green has alluded to. And I think, you know, to actually deviate from that standard model probably wouldn't be wise. And, you know, as Mr. Green says, it is a matter of negotiation. But I think you can be assured that certainly coming from my perspective, and what we would be arguing for is that long option period. And I think it should give you the comfort that you need, that it certainly the school site wouldn't be built on or used for alternative purposes in the short to medium term, and in the long term indeed, if it was deemed not to be necessary, it would come forward as a separate planning application on which the Education Authority would be consulted, and its own mitigation would then be considered.
I really would like to bring someone else in.
The only risk there is for the Education Department to tell the developer before the 10-year period is up that they don't intend to exercise their option. So please, can that eventuality be covered in the Section 106? So at least we have the 10-year period.
Will be there. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Pooley, did you want to come in at this point? We are having trouble with these tonight.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to come into that debate very briefly. It's good to see Mr. Gammy here, because I think what he's witnessing at the moment is a frustration which we in the Planning Committee often encounter, which is that we're asked to approve something where local residents in particular, never mind what we think, are saying you can't possibly approve this when you're not certain that we're going to get a school or a doctor's surgery or a this or that or the other. But at least in the context of the schools question, up until relatively recently, it has been in the County Council's gift, and therefore in our brief to negotiate with our partner in the County Council. Whereas now we've got two things going on: the Secretary of State making the decision rather than yourselves, and secondly making it about foundation schools rather than what you might choose. I guess I wanted to say one thing. First of all, Mr. Gammy's assertion that it would be really, really wrong to build a school if we couldn't predict the likely need for it. We're building 1,000 houses without being able to predict the likely need for the school. So that you can only carry that argument so far. And there are statistics which show that for a certain number of houses you're likely to get a certain number of school children, just as there are statistics which show that the growth rate of the population is likely to be of a certain extent. So I think that the policy may need a bit of a look at, Blaise. I think that's what we're saying, that we would like to see you having the ability to make more certain decisions than you can, because that affects us. The only suggestion that I would have to cover Councillor Poulter's point is to wonder whether we can't have a wording within the Section 106 or within wherever it is, saying that this will be a site for a school unless. In other words, it's upside down from it will be a school site if, and whether that unless can then have something written into it which would enable us to have some sort of influence over what happened then. So it's turning that around one with the other. Obviously, I have highways points, but that'll do for now.
I think we are where we are we not? I'm not sure that we can go any further with that. Does anybody?
I mean, I think basically that is what we're saying, that the school site would be reserved unless there are not enough school children from the development to serve the school. So in effect, it's the same thing. In the opinion of who? The Education Authority.
Yes, I'm trying to see if we can't find ourselves in a position
I think not.
I don't think we can. I think what we can try to do is put something in the 106 that the county council and the city council must have an agreement about the site coming forward. I'm sure that to cover off Richard's point about Essex just solely saying we don't need a site in 5 years, I think we can put somewhere in there about negotiations, and that's a legal point. We can put, and we look at that to cover that point. But I think it's not like this will be a school site unless A, B, C, because in fact it will come forward as a school site if there's a need for it. And that's the basis for what 106 will be saying.
Unless anybody else has anything, I'd like to go to any other questions that might be coming up from the committee at this point. Ah, sorry, Councillor Sampson, I couldn't see.
Sorry, Chair, can I just give a technical hint to people? If your microphone isn't working, if everyone just presses the button until the green light flash, then it should reconnect with the sound system, and then it should come on when you press it to speak.
I've got it. Okay, I've got the microphone. What's the provision for the early years, like the nurseries? Because I appreciate that they're private businesses, so it's a bit different. How will that work? Do we know that those are going to become those businesses?
Who wishes to answer that?
I have to state that I am not actually from the early years and childcare team. My responsibility is statutory age. But I will attempt to give you a brief answer, and that is that what is reserved is land sufficient for 256 place early years and childcare facilities. One would be co-located on the school sites if that goes forward, but I think provision in the Section 106 agreement would allow for it to come forward separately as well in the event that the primary school wasn't built.
Okay. What other questions do we have? Yeah, please carry on, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a similar vein, actually, to Councillor Sampson, and I'm not sure we entirely got an answer to that, which is these are some of the aspects of this rely on private companies coming in. And I would say I've got something like the car club. I think that was mentioned that the developer was going to start that. They're presumably not generally a car club. So there's kind of, I would say, an anticipation that there are going to be private companies coming in to provide some of these services, like the early years provision. So that does assume that someone wants to do it, and you'd hope that someone would want to do it, but at the same time, we have no control over that. So what happens if someone doesn't come in to provide early years education? Or if they're nursery provision, what happens then? Because that puts pressure on our existing services in South Woodham and it adds to the journeys that are being made. And similar to that, the bus journey or the new bus routes, I appreciate that there is funding for a certain amount of time for those new bus routes, but it's quite limited, and then there's this assumption that at that time they'll be self-sufficient, so they'll be fine. And we're currently in a situation where bus routes are being reduced a lot. I live somewhere and I used to have a bus every 15, 20 minutes, and now it's once an hour. And so what do we have? I suspect the answer is no. Any kind of guarantees that this will be in perpetuity, Or is it simply that we'll have it for a few years, and then it's entirely possible that the private bus company decides actually they're going to reduce that service, and then all these assumptions that we're making about the journeys that are being made actually are completely incorrect, because there isn't a bus service every half an hour that's reliable that people can use to get to wherever it is they happen to want to be going. So I think those my concerns around the kind of reliance on private companies that will, they have different criteria based on what services they provide, because they are there to make a profit. And then separate from that, I'm sorry to be a bit bitty. There's quite a lot in there about cyclepaths, and I love cyclepaths being around. But I'm concerned there's a number of them that are cycle and pedestrian shared pathways. And I know there are some around that are segregated, but I'm still concerned about the number that are shared, because actually it's the worst of both worlds for pedestrians and cyclists. It doesn't get you anywhere fast on a bike, and it just makes this clash between cyclists and pedestrians. So is it possible for those areas to actually be segregated? I think Councillor Poulter started by saying, in general, I support the idea of this application and the housing allocation. It's part of the local plan, so I'm pleased to see that development coming forward. And there is a substantial number of affordable homes coming in, many of them for affordable rent, which is I'm really pleased to see. So it's not all negative things I'm saying. But I also, I think it's Councillor Bentley, talks about a no gas condition, and is that something we've looked at? Can someone come back about that? And also the low carbon standards for the housing. I think that's it. Thank you.
Is there another question from the committee before we go back to the officers? Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Jim. My second issue relates to highways. I'm very disturbed to learn that one of the matters that affects highways depends upon the order in which the application is made. We've heard that there's a probability of 750 houses being built at Althorn over probably a considerable period of years. But we've given that limited concern because it's not happening yet, but we know that it will happen. Now, under paragraph 25 of the NPPF, there's a duty to cooperate. So, in my view, we need to cooperate with Malden and the likelihood of additional traffic along the road that we're talking about, the Burnham Road. And also, we know about Bradwell B. We don't know whether it will happen. But if it does happen, there'll be a vast amount of new traffic also going along this road. And there's nothing in the officer's report about Bradwell B. I don't know whether there's been any consultation or what their view is. But the duty to cooperate exists. So I would like to know what has happened about Bradwell B. And the answer, I find a potential answer that says, well, it isn't certain yet, we don't know what's going to go on, is not really satisfactory, because this road is going to be in use for a number of years. We might well decide the order on which development takes place, because, for instance, Althorn hasn't come on. But for the residents of South Woodham, they're not concerned about the order in which applications are made. They're concerned about travelling along this road and across this road. And it's them that we have to take account of. If I just come back to what was said about the bus service, the buses to Chelmsford currently run every hour. Till a few months ago, they ran every half an hour. So what we're being offered is something which, until a few months ago, existed already. And I know that from personal experience, because I use that bus service myself. Coming still on highways. Like Councillor Bentley, I've raised questions on this site and the traffic implications at every stage, right from it was originally conceived. And I've been met with the same answer by Mr. Potter most recently. Leave it till planning, raise it at planning. Well, my concern is not directly on the road through South Woodham, although by implication it will affect it, but the knock-on effect along the B1418 and along Willow Grove, because it's inevitable that with the increased houses there will be increased traffic exiting and entering into South Woodham. There will be an effect upon the B1418, the effect upon the school which fronts onto the main road, there will be an effect upon the villages. So what is needed there and along Willow Grove leading up to Hyde Hall is some means of traffic calming. And that's what Jeremy Potter suggested I should raise. But there's nothing in here, so I'm raising it now, and please can I have an answer?
I'm doing these first because...
Yes, fine.
I'll start, and I'm looking to my two colleagues to jump in because I'm not a detail person on this. Let's start with the general thing about the Hawthorne and Bradwell B. I think Emma described already that the modelling done by the County Council at this stage is taken into background growth, which we are aware of, and that includes, in accordance with government advice, allocated sites. That's already been done. And also the modelling done by Essex, as she said, always used the more aggressive, the more in our favour statistics. We haven't been trying to actually put the lower figures, we've put the higher figures in these modelling. So there's a degree of robustness in that. All form application, it's an application, it has not been approved, it's a speculative application. If I was sitting in Morden and the speculative application coming to us, not on an allocated site, sitting outside our settlement apartments, I would know how we would want to look at it. So we can't second guess application come forward. All we can look at is what's in the pipeline, what's in the plans at a time that this has come in. And that's what we've done on the modelling. And the modelling, and when Jeremy says to you, wait till the planning application stage, he's right. You've out of planning application stage, you've got a set of mitigations which actually shows you how traffic will be handled on this application, which mitigates growth from these schemes. You've got a set of assessments which shows that it doesn't cause severe harm to the highway or congestion. So you've got the information before you to assess this application. This is the right time to assess that. I think Bradwell B is like Hawthorne. We sat down for Bradwell B, they've went away, they've withdrawn it. I haven't got a crystal ball. I can't tell you whether that's coming back or it's going to come back at all. My own view on that is probably because of the connections with the various electricity companies, it probably won't come back in a different form. It will come back in a different form, but not for the foreseeable future. When it does come back, it is for them then to justify the highway case for it to mitigate its highway needs of that development. It's not for us looking at Southwood and Ferris to do that for them.
Thank you. A few points raised there. If I go back to the education early years point, first of all. So early years, as you said, are provided by private companies. And within the Section 106 for this application, we would require Countryside Properties to market the site for a specific period of time, which again is subject to negotiation, but they would require to market the site for early years. So there are two sites, the school site and the separate site on the eastern side of the development. The car club would be funded by the developer. Yes, it would be a private company, but it would be funded by the developer. It would also be funded for 5 years after final occupation. And the Highways Authority have requested that membership to the car club is either discounted or free to members of the, to residents of the new development. In terms of the cycleways, most of the cycleways through the development are segregated fully segregated pedestrian cycleways. I think there is only one that is a shared cycleway, which is where there's restricted width across the front of the medical centre. But my highways colleague will correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that they are all fully segregated. The point that Councillor Bentley raised about gas, this is a fully electric site. There would be no gas boilers on this site. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we go on to Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you. Most of my questions have been answered. I've got a few questions, a few points. First of all, the inspectorate who signed off the local plan, he agreed based on 1,000, not the 1,200 plus the 88 care home. That's just a point. So basically the inspectorate didn't agree to this. The 35% affordable, is that set in stone now, or is it possible for the developer to massage this down later on? Because I'd like to see that 35% being very solid. Again, with the traffic modelling, could you clarify some confusion over when this was modelled to? Because there was the date of 2026 mentioned. And also, could you explain the scenario where it's believed there'll be a decrease in traffic? That was brought up by the town councillors. The bond for the future possible traffic improvements, that's £400,000. Could you explain how that figure, where that figure came from? Because it doesn't sound like that would go very far. And if we need it, I'd rather that didn't come out of taxpayers' pockets. Thank you.
Okay. Ready to go back?
I can answer a couple of those, and a couple I will ask the Highways Authority to answer. So in terms of the local plan inspector, yes, they did consider 1,000 houses, but as you'll see in the strategic growth site policy, it's around 1,000 houses. The master plan that was approved by Cabinet, that showed a density of 1,200 homes, so this is in compliance with that master plan. The 35% affordable houses, yes, that would be secured through the Section 106 agreement. And then I will defer to Mrs Featherstone for the other two highway-related questions.
Can you?
Right, okay. In relation to the traffic modelling, so we can only ask the developer to mitigate the impact of their development. So if they modelled to 2036, they would have to put on background growth on top of their base figures and then put on the development impact, which actually waters down the development impact. By only going to 2026, they've assumed their full development is built out, regardless of whether it actually happens in 2026. That we've looked at taking the base traffic flows, adding on the development traffic, and then we see what the impact is, and then the mitigation can be calculated. So by having it on a shorter date, they haven't added in as much background growth, which then means that their development shows a greater impact, and actually it works in our favour because it doesn't water down. The background growth doesn't water down the impact, so we secure a greater level of mitigation for that development. In terms of the decrease in traffic, I can't answer the specific question. I can say that the VISM modelling has been assessed by Jacobs, who are the Highway Authority's VISM modelling experts. They've looked at it, and as I alluded to earlier, it's a technical process. It's really specialised and does require technical input. I don't do it myself, but you take the inputs and then they have to be, sorry, I'm trying to find the right word written down. They have to be calibrated. And I think that is where, if you try and compare the traffic flows from 2020 compared to the future calibrated flows of the VISM model, they're not it's like comparing apples and oranges. It's not the same. So that's why. But I can confirm Jacobs have gone through the VISM assessment. It was prepared by the applicant's transport consultant. Jacobs have considered it, and they've provided a thorough response, and it's satisfactory. We you know, there's no problems with it. And just in terms of the bond, the 400k, it's just a figure that's there in case there's any problems. It's not based on a specific scheme or anything, because we're not sure what scheme might be needed, but it was a reasonable figure that we negotiated to have there in case there are any problems.
Okay, thank you. Oh, do you want to come back, Councillor Lee?
Yeah, sorry, again, on that 400,000. It doesn't sound a lot. I mean, what can you do for 400,000? I would guesstimate some not particularly major changes to a roundabout. And if we need more than that, that's taxpayers' money. I don't want to see it. So I would like to see that figure increased.
I mean, it wouldn't be significant roundabout changes. It would be things around the edges, additional signage, maybe if there's, I mean, there's been some discussion about concerns with traffic routing along King Edmund Road. It would be some sort of small-scale traffic calming to prevent traffic doing that if there was a problem. It wouldn't be your large-scale roundabout changes, because actually that mitigation's already secured as part of that. But I take your point. I don't know whether we can look at negotiating more.
I think the point here is that the modelling has been carried out to show that the junction improvements are acceptable. So I think that's the point. That's the first point to take, is that we're not using this 400,000 to secure mitigation for this development. That's just if the modelling shows that the transport is not as we thought it was. I mean, modelling is normally fairly accurate. So the idea is that the modelling does show that the mitigation is acceptable. I take your point that 400,000 is not a lot, but I think what Mrs Featherstone is saying, and this was alluded to in the master plan discussions, is that this would be used for things like traffic calming measures rather than whole-scale roundabout improvements. So it would be more like things along King Edward Road, etc., to prevent, rat running.
Okay, Councillor Pooley, who wanted to speak.
I'm afraid does that mean it works? Oh, this is good. Wasn't a green light. I don't know. I don't understand this. Anyway, I'm sure that we can solve the microphone problems, because it is frankly embarrassing to have this apparent to the public every time this happens. Anyway, 2 or 3 points on highways issues. First of all, on the bus thing to Wickford, I'm glad that there's recognition in here of the need to provide something to improve the transport from South Woodham to Wickford. I wonder whether doing it at peak times addresses most of the need. It may address some of the need, but I think we heard earlier on that people who are going to Wickford for all sorts of other reasons, or are wanting to get up to town to go to the theatre or whatever it is, if they decide to go to Wickford, go by car. And so it seems to me that the related point that was made, that what we need is an improvement to the branch line, stands out like a sore thumb here and isn't really being discussed adequately for my liking. I don't know, for example, whether it's even been suggested to the train company that we'd like them to think about it. I remember at the policy board, the example that we quoted was the Braintree branch line, because in most people's living memory, that was only a branch line. And if you were in Braintree and you wanted to go to town, you drove to Chelmsford. That's what you did, quite a lot. Yet we now know that by improving that branch line from Braintree to Chelmsford, the flow of traffic to London from Braintree and all stations in between is now quite considerable. So it seems to me that's a discussion which ought to be being had, and a recommendation which ought to be coming forward in the context of this development and any future developments that we're talking about, whether it's Bradwell B or whatever it is, doesn't matter. It is something that we need to bring to everyone's attention, that improving that branch line would solve significantly, would be a much more significant step towards active travel, which is what the County Council wants, than anything that's being suggested here. in my opinion. Secondly, the thing which really worries me about this is a disagreement between the objector's traffic professional and Jacob's traffic professional. Now, I'm not a professional either, so I'm in no position, even if it was on the website, I'm in no position to start analysing the pros and cons, but I'm listening to a very well-intentioned, and I have no reason to believe it's inaccurate or a lie, comment from the public gallery that he was giving 3 examples of how the Jacobs assessment, or the Jacobs professionals assessment, simply can't be the case. Now, just listening to that gentleman, I was thoroughly taken with the way he presented it and underlined to me the fact that in this sort of situation, we really do need reassurance that the professionals have talked to each other and understood what their pros and cons of each of their assessments is, so that we, and as Featherstone has kindly admitted that she's not a professional either, but we all, including the County Council's highways officers, need to have the reassurance that all of this has been thrashed out between professionals. And that's what's being presented to us. Because I can't second guess the County Council's highways officer about this, that and the other. I just can't. But nor can I second guess what I'm being told about the objector's professional. So I am thoroughly uncomfortable. At the policy board, which councillors will remember, this was the thing which held us back from recommending the master plan without reservation. The comments that we made at the policy board, if I remember rightly, were to be passed on to Cabinet so that they were aware that we were unhappy about the highways implications without an awful lot of further work. Now, I take my hats off to people for spending as much time as they have between whatever it was, March 2021, when the policy board met, and now, in order to respond to what we said, which was that an awful lot more work needs to be done on the highways implications of this. And clearly, the time which has been taken has been mostly or a lot about that. So I accept that the work has been done. I can't find the way in which I can judge between one professional opinion and another. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll respond on the point about the bus to Wickford. So in terms of does this address most of the need? Well, the point of the bus in the peak hours is for alleviation of congestion during the need, when there is most need to go to the train station. So we understand that Wickford has a much better service than the Southwood and Ferrers train station. We can only secure what is necessary and reasonable as part of this planning application. Also, just to point out that we did consult Network Rail on this planning application, and their response was not anything to do with we would like more trains, we would like more, infrastructure. Their response simply said that they requested the developer to contact the local level crossings manager, which I believe the developer has done and has had no response. I'll refer to my colleague on the vision modelling because that's not my area of expertise.
All I can say is that we, as a highway authority, have used Jacobs to assess the vision modelling, and they've come back to us. As I sort of said in my opening speech, it is as the inspector on the appeal decision that was referred to by one of the councillors there. There will be scope for disagreement between professionals, and it will often be the case that 2 different assumptions can be reasonably made where justified in particular circumstances of the case. And I think that this is the case here, but from the evidence that has been submitted to the Highway Authority, it has been assessed and the Highway Authority is accepting of it. And the contrary to that is that it's not acceptable, and we're not in a position to say it's not acceptable.
I mean, I fully understand that.
Yeah.
My straightforward question is, have the 2 professionals talked to each other?
No.
Thank you. I thought that would be the case.
Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually have a proposition or proposal.
Better.
Perhaps it's a better word. I agree with what Councillor Pooley has said with regard to highways. It is unfortunately that SCP haven't yet been able to discuss their report with Ringway Jacobs and vice versa. The information that we've been given is from local residents is that SCP only had a week to discuss the further report, transport report from the County Council, which doesn't give them sufficient time to respond in detail. This is a major application for South Woodham. It is a major application for this council. The effects of our decision are going to be felt for very many years to come. It is important that we get it right. I'm fully in favour of this development. It will happen, but serious questions about traffic have been raised, about the SCP report and about discussions with the County Council, about the road capacity and the disagreements between them. The effect that that capacity doesn't take into account or may not take into account Bradwell B or Althorn or other developments in the Dingy. It doesn't appear to take into account any knock-on effects for traffic calming on the B14 and Willow Grove, which we were assured would be dealt with at the planning stage. We need to determine this application, but I don't think we're quite there yet. I would like to propose that we defer the application until these highway issues have been fully resolved and that we can consider them with full knowledge of the facts, rather than make a decision tonight based on supposition and insufficient information. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just come back to that? I think it's a bit unfair on the Essex County Council. The reports and transport assessments have been in since October. What we've got now is Essex looking at this and doing a proper assessment using their own consultants and their own professional advice. The SPC it's just like anything else. It's a consultation report which they've looked at and considered. They don't have to come into agreement. We are taking a view on whether we believe that the assessment submitted to us is acceptable and doesn't cause any harm. And the advice that we've done from the modelling we've done, which is quite extensive and quite conservative on their part, shows there's no harm and the mitigation we're proposing is acceptable. Now, separate consultants can have a different view, but our view is that as what's before us in the assessments, it's acceptable on transport grounds. The County Council doesn't need to sit down with objectors and agreed position.
Right, Councillor Sampson. No, I'm sorry, not from the audience at all. Councillor Sampson. Could you come round to Councillor Poulter's? Oh, there we are, we have one.
Oh, God. Oh, now my one's working. Now I've got like 10. My question is just a process one, because we've got this thing with the MP and we've got this other stage. Bearing in mind how long we can debate things like moving a garden shed, I totally agree with Councillor Poulter that this is a massive decision and we just really want to get it right, and when it's 9 o'clock at night, it's quite a pressurised situation. So when we get through that with the Secretary of State and the MP, does it come back to us? Do we talk about materials and look? Because I don't want to sort of make a decision tonight and then find that was our last chance.
Okay, as I understand it, what we've got at the moment is a holding direction. So if tonight you decided that you were mindful to approve, we would notify the Secretary of State and they'll have a period of time to decide whether they want to intervene or not. They'll have to intervene on whether we've considered this in a proper and right way, whether we consider all the appropriate evidence, what was before you, whether it's in accordance with the local plan, it's in accordance with national policy. And it's on those grounds that they'll take a view of whether they want to intervene or not. Or not. The fact they've had a holding direction is just in response to a local MP. So I don't think a Secretary of State has considered it any further than that, and they'll look at our reports when we'll go in, and they'll take a view on that. I can't see on the basis of what the evidence we've done and we've put through it that will be taken in by Secretary of State. That's my own view, but I could be proven wrong on that. But you've really got to come to a point as committee about, you know, you've got a very strong recommendation coming from the higher authority saying they considered all the evidence. That's what's before you. As planners, we're saying we've gone all through, we've done the assessment. They've took over a year to go back and look at the evidence and get more information. We've done that. We've got very robust modelling. You've got proposals before you now showing all the mitigation to the roundabouts. You've got mitigation on bus services. Some people will disagree with that, obviously that they will, but there comes a point where you've got to look at the evidence and recommendations to say, is that enough, yes, or what more do you want? There always will be people disagreeing with our views or recommendations from the higher authority.
Thank you, that's helpful in terms of the holding direction, and if we make an assumption that that goes away, does it come back to us?
What happens?
Oh. Sorry, I think you'll have to have this back.
It won't come back to you, no. The approval details will come back to you, but what will happen next is that we will then negotiate the 106 and do all the clauses on 106, and I've taken on board some of the comments you've said tonight about the period of the education. Maybe we'll look at the sum of the bond or on the highway things. We'll look at that again in negotiation. What will then come back to committee is all the various details of the approval details about layouts, design of buildings, landscape, and that will come back to you, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
I'm just going to pause things a minute. Talk to our legal officer. Can we please have everybody back in their places? This is not on. Thank you. This is not what I need. Right, Councillor Poulter, I have to take your proposal. So therefore, do you have a seconder at this point? You do have a seconder. Therefore, I will have to take a vote on this. Okay, so can you restate specific points?
But I'll do what I can. That the application be deferred on highway grounds for the Highway Authority and SCP to consider whether they can come up with a common view relating to the amount of traffic that is going to be put onto the Burnham Road, taking into account the probable extra traffic from Althorn, the modelling that's already been done, the impact upon the B14-18 and Willow Grove, and also taking into account the adequacy or otherwise of the provision that has been made for the bond, and the matters that were put forward by Councillor Pooley, which I must confess are not at the front of my mind.
Thank you. Well, I think that's enough to vote on. Councillor Pawley. Yes, please.
I commend his memory because I couldn't remember all of that stuff that I was seconding, although I'm happy
come
to do
on.
so.
Please just finish the point you wish to make.
I was going to say that even had his proposal not been that comprehensive, I would have been happy to second it because I think it's for us, the committee. We're the people, on the committee, need time in order to understand the differences of apparently professional opinion which are being put in front of us. So for me, it's not meant to be a criticism of the County Council, a criticism of Jacobs, or support of the objectors' professional opinion. It's the fact that I have not had the opportunity to consider those because the contrary professional opinion is not even on the website, I'm told. So how could I have considered it?
So are you still supporting?
Yes. I'm just trying to make out that I don't think one has to vote in favour of all of Councillor Poulter's points in order to vote in favour of something.
You have to decide that. Otherwise, I can't take a vote.
Can I help? Because it may well be, because that was quite detailed. I think that the substance of what Councillor Poulter is trying to say is it should defer on the highways grounds. I think that's what really you're saying. You want more information. And I think perhaps if obviously there's a seconder on that, take it on that basis. Because I've got to be honest, some of the things that are being suggested, I'm not sure that that's something that the officers will be able to take away and come back with anything different than what's in the report tonight. So I think the more detailed you get, the more dangerous territory, should you say, you're getting into where the officers are not going to be able to respond. I think that's, as I understand it, that's really what Councillor Poulter is saying. Can you go away and give us more information, particularly when you add in what Councillor Pooley's then saying, is really, could you try to give us more information to satisfy us in relation to the highways issues that have been raised and the discussions about them tonight?
If it's more information, I think we need to be specific, because what I'm getting is that you want the consultants that act on behalf of the residents to come to agreement with Essex County Council. But that may never happen. So when we come back again with this disagreements, how are you going to assess that?
But that's why I asked whether they'd been asked to talk to each other, and I got the answer no. So at the very least we can ask them to talk to each other to try to resolve these points.
The Highway Authority has assessed the views of those consultants that have been taken into account.
Well, some people on the planning committee don't feel that they're in a position to have done so.
Well, I think we have to go with what we've been asked.
Yes.
And you have decided to second it, Councillor Poulter?
Yeah, I'm very happy with what Ms Lorraine has to say. She puts my words better than I do. I don't wish to have any, I don't intend any criticism whatsoever of the Highway Authority. They've obviously worked very hard and they've given a professional view, and I respect that view. Where I think there is a difference is that the Highway Authority have produced a report at a late stage, which SCP haven't had the full opportunity to consider. So the Highway Authority hasn't had the opportunity to consider the comments of SCP on their late introduced comments. So I'm not trying to lay down grounds different to what Lorraine's saying, but merely to give some indication as to what the Highway Authority might wish to consider in advance of the deferred meeting, if that's the decision we make.
Can I just say one point? SPC is a consultant, a consultee. All right? Their role is to submit the comments to us to consider. They haven't got an obligation. There's not an obligation from Essex to actually show them their own views. They had all the traffic assessment back in October. So, there's not a need for further time because they've made their comments.
I think decisions have to be made. I think this is going to go on and on. So we will have to come to a view. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. So you've all heard Councillor Poulter and Lorraine Brown telling us the position. So now we've got a proposal and a seconder. All those in favour of Councillor Poulter's suggestion that we defer. 2. All those against? Do we have a yes, I can see. So it's 2 against the falls. So therefore, at this point, I will go straight back to the actual consultation. That Hamberts Farm, Burnham Road, Southwood and Ferrers, will be accepted, subject to a Section 106 agreement being entered into, pursuant of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, and the Secretary of State determining not to call in the application, that the Director of Sustainable Communities be authorised to grant the application subject to the conditions on page 31 to 53 and on the green sheet. Do I have a seconder? I do. Thank you in that case. All those in favour of granting the application? Okay. And all those against? Any abstentions? 1 abstention. So that is agreed. Thank you. The application has gone through. Thank you for all the discussion. I do realise this has been very hard on everyone, on both sides of the argument. So thank you very much. That concludes the information for tonight. Thank you.